Hello, everyone, and welcome to Synthesis. I'm Emily.
And I'm Justin.
So Synthesis is a Root and River hosted webcast bringing together nonconformist leaders whose ideas make them and us see the world differently. We're so excited that this is our 10th episode. Did you know that, Just?
I did know that. I count things, you know.
So thank you for joining us. We appreciate it. We are thrilled today to have two people that we admire and adore with us, Ron Price and Stacy Ennis. And I'll tell you a little bit about them before they jump in and we begin the conversation. So Justin's known Ron for years and years and years. I've known Ron for several years, had the pleasure. He is an amazing person. He's an internationally recognized business advisor and consultant, executive coach, speaker, author. He's worked in 15 countries. He's served almost every level of executive management. And he was at one time the CEO of a multi-million-dollar international company. But Ron's spirit is around partnering with people, working with them side by side to help them develop strategic clarity in their businesses and to go through transformational moments and sort of meeting them wherever they are, whether they're in turmoil, transition, and helping smooth that moment. He is definitely a nonconformist, and in a nonconformist move in 2004, he started Price Associates, which is a leadership performance firm that has a different take on everything that they do, really, and that's what he runs today. So that's a little bit about Ron. Now, Stacy's coming to us this morning from Thailand because she's a world traveler and citizen. So Stacy is a creative consultant, coach, and author. She's a ghostwriter, editor, and actually she and her husband just moved to Thailand a month ago. One of many international adventures that maybe we'll get to talk about. So Stacy really meets her clients at the place where they are beginning to shape ideas, and she helps them shape those ideas and content and products before they go ahead and send them out into the world. She's been involved in writing and editing dozens of books, including her own, The Editor's Eye. And she and Ron together have written a book called Growing Influence, which is available September 18th. We're going to talk about that. She has a master's in professional writing and editing and a bachelor's in writing and a TEDx talk, How to Raise Brave Kids, which has been viewed thousands of times. And just preparing for those introductions last night, I felt highly inadequate and went to bed hoping this morning I would feel worthy of the interview. So we're both really excited to have you here today.
So
Likewise.
Good morning, Ron. Good evening, Stacy.
Yes.
You are our second international podcast. Our first one was with Doug and Tree, which I think you also obviously know Doug and Tree. They live in Canada. So we are fulfilling our one of our goals of world domination through great.
There you go.
And so welcome. It's an honor to visit with you guys. So, is there anything about either of your bios that Emily shared that you'd like to add to?
Yes.
Anything that came up?
Well, on my part, there are certainly things I'd like to take away from because it sounded a little exaggerated. But
Yes.
I think the only thing I'd like to add, Justin, is that a huge part of my life is my marriage to Pam of 43 years. And counting. And we've been very privileged to have 6 children, and now we have 9 grandchildren. Mm-hmm. And the older I get, the more I see what an important part they've played in shaping me, in helping me to become who I am. They also inspire me to who I want to become, how much more I want to grow, so that I don't disappoint them and I serve them.
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful.
Great, beautiful.
That was lovely.
Top that.
Yeah, that's going to be difficult. I guess I would add, so this is our 3rd developing country that we've lived in. Before we had kids, we lived in the Dominican Republic and also in Vietnam. And then we were stateside for several years, doing grad school, having babies, and now we're back in Thailand. This is our first not only international move as a family, but actual time leaving the country with the children. So we're in an island in southern Thailand, and we're adjusting, kind of getting into the swing of things, but it's an adventure.
That's great. That's
Great.
wonderful. I've lived abroad as well, but I can't imagine just all of the logistical and added dynamics of doing so with children. So
Remind me, where did you live again?
I lived in northern Japan for a year, and then I
Nice.
lived in Scotland during college for a year.
Lovely. Both of those places are on my list for sure.
Yeah, they're great.
Well, go ahead.
It's funny that you both mentioned your adventures with your family, because whenever I read about someone who I'm impressed with, I've begun, now that I've been married 16 years myself and 2 kids, I've begun to look at their accomplishments and be impressed, but also think about the people and the relationships that got them to that point, because I now understand that nobody does, accomplishes anything in a vacuum. So with that in mind, and maybe casting a little bit back a little bit further, is there a formative memory that you carry with you, like lasting memory that either came from your childhood or early family life that you revisit often, that stays with you? And Ron, we'll start with you.
Okay, thanks. It's fascinating to me. I'm at that stage of life where you reflect more because you realize that you've got more past than you're going to have future. Mm-hmm. And so I realize how much my early years shaped who I am. And I was not conscious of that at the time that it was happening. So now, because of what we've learned through neuroscience, we understand that those first 6 or 8 years have a profound impact on how you lead, on how you relate to other people, on what your values are. And of course, at the time that those values were being shaped, I was not aware of it at all. So I look back, and I was born in 1953. So I'm a child of parents who went through World War II and who, when they were children, experienced the Depression. That had a huge impact on them. And consequently, the way that they lived their lives had a huge impact on me. So I remember as a young child growing up, probably the experience that's most profound to me now as I reflect back on it was this sense of sacrifice and duty. That they came out of a time where during the Depression, you didn't know if you were going to make it, and you couldn't make it without banding together with other people. And then coming out of World War II, the tremendous sacrifice that so many families made. My father's family, he had altogether, there were 4 boys. All 4 of them served in the armed forces during World War II. And amazingly, all 4 of them came home. Quite unusual for that to happen. But that, because it shaped him so much, it shaped me a lot. And I now, watching my children and grandchildren, can look back and realize, wow, what a profound impact that had on me. And it's not the same experience that children go through today.
No.
Mm.
Thank you.
Wow, that was a great response. Mine isn't quite as deep. I remember, I think the thing that had the biggest impact on me as a child is reading. And I have a very vivid memory of closing. So in 2nd grade, I read the Chronicles of Narnia books 1 through 7. I think are there 7 books? I think there are 7 books. And I remember closing that last book and feeling so, at least for me, I always mourn at the end of a great book. It's like I can never experience that book again, right? And then there was that. And then I think there was this also sense of, wow, I just read 7 books and I've never done that before. And it was like I escaped into this whole other world. And I loved it. And so I spent, the majority of my young life reading, and interestingly, chronic underachiever until I got into high school, at which time I discovered that I could manipulate the system to give me more freedom. And so once I figured that out and I was able to take control of my schedule, suddenly I had straight A's and I was a high achiever. But my books, my reading, I think, is what was my intellectual stimulation all through. And so that became kind of my thing, and I look back fondly, definitely, at various books throughout my life.
Interesting. Thank you both. Those are beautiful answers. Kind of taking on the theme of our journey, childhood into education, early adulthood. Do you recall a moment where you began to push back against a teaching or a system, where something you were taught and you were told to obey or whatever, and that could be related to a family ritual, it could be religious, it could be political, where you began to challenge what you were taught or what systems you were asked to conform to? And we'll start with you, Stacy.
Yes, there are a lot of those moments growing up for sure, but I can remember this one particular. This is very specific. So I went to a private Christian school until high school, and it was not a good fit for my personality at all. And one year they decided that they had this brilliant idea for discipline, that if we misbehaved, they would give us a piece of paper, and we would leave the classroom and interrupt another classroom and go into that classroom and fill it out, then come back and re-interrupt our original classroom and hand the paper to our teacher. Terrible idea. I was a teacher for a little while. I can't even imagine trying to implement that. And I thought it was pretty silly. I thought it was a silly idea. And I also didn't understand at the time why we had so much rigidity in school. And I was really bored. I was so bored in school. So I think I ended up being kind of a troublemaker until, later high school, as I mentioned. And so I was the winningest student for the number of, they're called refocuses, that I got in the course of a year. I was student body president. They threatened to take me out of my role. And I think I got 62 of those. Most kids got 4 over a year. So that's an early example of,
Maybe that's what the Stalags were. Maybe that's what Stalin was doing. Like, hey, you need to refocus.
Well, Stacy, it strikes me that that's where your writing career began.
Hey, there you go. I got some good practice. Yeah.
For me, you have to keep in mind that I was a teenager in the 60s and early 70s.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So that was a very different time in our society. And I think probably the way that I pushed back was that I was very interested in civil rights. I was very interested in fairness and social justice. But I pushed back against the whole drug culture and the whole free love. I never experienced any of that. So I was actually pushing back against my own folks who were going out having a good time. And I think part of what drove it was that my folks went through a very, very difficult divorce when I was 10 years old. Mm. My mom was a preacher's kid. And in 1963, for her to have to tell people that she was divorced was about the worst curse that you could ever imagine. I remember in the 5th grade, I was the only student in my class from a broken family. Obviously, it's a different world today. That really impacted me profoundly, and it caused me to, in some ways, grow up fast. My mom didn't have anybody to talk to, and for those years after my dad left us, by the way, I had a wonderful relationship with my dad for decades after, but for years, I became a listener. And that coincided with me getting interested in theater at the same time. So I acted in my first play when I was 9. So I studied a guy named Konstantin Stanislavski, who was at that time the most famous director in the world. He was a Russian director, and he pioneered what today is referred to as the method acting approach, which most of Hollywood follows. And the whole context, or the whole foundation of method acting, is empathy. You have to understand other people. You have to observe. So from 9 years old on, I was going out learning how to observe other people and how to take an interest in other people. And then I had this situation where my mom needed somebody who would take interest in her. I don't remember ever giving my mom any advice, but I remember hours and hours and hours of listening to her agonize with what she went through. By the way, my mom found another man years later, married him, and she had 20 years of bliss. He was a perfect husband before she passed away. But though I think the way I pushed back was I sort of skipped by the rebellious teenage years because of my love of theater and because of my relationship with my mom. And I moved into this fascination with what made people different and this joy of discovering that difference. And I can't say that I always found joy in other people. I think what I found joy in was their potential of what somebody could become. And that's really shaped my whole life since then.
It's a great segue into talking a little bit about growing influence, because I really see that imprint in the book. So in particular, Ron, you said that this book is part of your journey of reflecting on leadership. And I think I see some of your leadership style even in that story and talking about empathy. So what have you learned on that journey, aside from, in addition to potential, and where is it leading you next? Talk a little bit.
Yeah. Well, for my own personal journey, I had the opportunity to start hiring employees back in 1971. So I've had a lot of years to do it the wrong way and to gradually learn how to do it the right way. And I think for probably the first couple of decades of my experience as a leader, I was what I now think of as a desperational leader. I had this imposter syndrome problem that a lot of people struggle with. I thought, well, I've got a lot of flaws, and sooner or later people are going to figure out those flaws, or I'm going to fail. I'm going to make a terrible decision. And I spent those first couple decades, I think, trying to fix myself. At some point, and it was evolutionary, it was not an aha moment, it happened slowly over time, I began to realize that that's a poor approach to leadership, that a much better approach is to become more of an aspirational leader, where you think about who could you become. It's funny because I always applied that toward other people, but with myself, I was super judgmental, super critical. And I began to think about it's a much better investment of your energy in thinking about what's the best version of yourself that you could become. And in order to do that, you have to acknowledge and let go of your fixation on your weaknesses. And you need to be able to stand up and say, you know what, I'm weak in this area and I'm never going to be great in this area. And I need somebody else to help me with this. So I think in that second phase of my leadership journey, I recognized that even though a lot of times you live in isolation as a leader, it's never a solo activity, that you always have people around you. And the more you recognize the importance of those people, the value of those people, the more you can advance your journey. And the third phase for me has been to begin to recognize that, yes, leadership is a means to an end, but I've now come to recognize that leadership is also an end in itself. Leadership is about knowing yourself, about becoming the best version of yourself, and about rejoicing or about celebrating who you are with a courage that's mixed with humility. So you never think that you've gotten there. You never think that somehow you're the best thing since sliced bread. But you learn how to get comfortable in your own skin and enjoy that and let other people help you along the journey. So this book is an extension of those 5 decades of experience that I've had now in leadership roles.
Stacy, on the book, what drew you to this project? And I know you're very thoughtful about all the projects that you take on. But tell me a little bit about what drew you to this topic and to this project.
Well, Ron and I have worked on a number of projects over the years, starting in 2011 on his book Treasure Inside, which was a revision of an existing book. And we worked then later on another book called The Complete Leader. And so when Ron approached me about this book in 2015, late 2015, and had this great idea for a book, he sent me a talk that he'd done to listen to. I was immediately excited about it. Ron is somebody I deeply admire. He's one of those people who truly lives his values. And working on a project with him, I love working with people who really believe in what they teach and what they share with the world. And so it's kind of, for me, it was obviously I would want to work with him on a project. But this book in particular, the content felt different. And for me, I've worked on a lot of books in the business and leadership within that genre. This felt really, really interesting, really intriguing. And then it took us a couple of years to get to start the project. There were a number of reasons for that. I think that was meant to be, right? Because if we had started it in 2015 instead of in 2017, it wouldn't have been this book. But really the thing that drew me to this project, number one was Ron. Number two was the content that he sent over.
And what about that content seemed
yeah,
interesting?
The audio he sent me originally was a talk that he'd done on the 3 dimensions of leadership. Mm-hmm. And so those dimensions: character, expertise, and position. And so it was, I think, about an hour, Ron, right? Hour-long talk that you'd done. And the way that Ron presented it was so engaging and really, really interesting. It caused me to think about myself as a leader and kind of, spurred some thought there. But then we worked in between that 2-year period. Ron had worked on a rough outline. And so I got a chance to see kind of a broader view of the book itself, because that was a talk, but this is a book, right? So he had worked on this outline for the book. We actually had created a full book outline for another version of this book when Ron became inspired by this idea of telling it as a fable. And so the content of this book, I would say the idea that we all have the ability to influence, that's the broad message. And we can go deeper into that, but told through a story that was a really meaningful way to get to work on a project. And also, even after all of these drafts, I mean, I don't even know how many times, Ron, we've been through this book at this point. So much input that we've certain scenes that we've worked on over and over. I still, every single time I close the written book, finish listening to the audio book, every single time I'm moved. And I think it's the story married with this idea of influence that is presented in such a fresh way that I think it's such a meaningful project. And I hope that we get to have the impact with it that I think it can have.
Awesome. We had the privilege, honor to receive the advanced versions of it and endorse it. And one of the things that after we both read it that I mentioned to Emily, and I still feel this today, is, the fable model is it's intriguing because it's another way, it's like a parable essentially, or an allegory. So this is an ancient idea, but I would boldly or bluntly say that most business fables aren't very good. So like the key point is excellent, but the story is weak. And, you could take something like leadership and self-deception is a great example. Great key point, but I would say, sloppy narrative made it less appealing. Andy Andrews' books, The Noticer and all those, are like that. The closest thing that it felt like to me was some like ancient parable, and where the contemporary version of it would be like Mitch Albom, if I'm saying his last name right. It had that feel to it, but it had a business component. And the other thing, and then I'll ask my question, the other thing I observed or retained is similar to what you're feeling without all of that emotional and literal input, Stacy, is this is a book that everyone should read, because connection is the only form that matters, especially in contemporary society. All of the statuses, updates, and titles and roles, and all that is going to end, and connection will be what's left. And if you can't influence, you can't connect. And if you can't connect, you can't exist in this modern world. So my question to both of you is, how did you How did you capture that feeling or that voice? What was the process that you went through to make sure that it rang true with authenticity and it wasn't just a business idea delivered in a fable format, but it was a story? How did you do that?
Well, Justin, we got started as we had scheduled the time that we were going to start working on the book together in a more intense way. And as we were preparing for that, I was convinced that the ideas we wanted to share needed to be put into a setting that had emotion and had connection and that honored relationships. And I shared that with Stacy, but I have to tell you that I first of all appreciate your comments about this book having a great story, not just great points, and give Stacy the credit for that, because it's her writing skills. And it's the way that she saw what was possible and developed it that gave us this. This is by far the most enjoyable collaborative project that I've ever worked on. There was just a magic in the way that we worked together. And it's funny because sometimes we were together, other times we were working separately. But when you put the whole thing together, there was such a tremendous flow. And we both seemed to capture the same vision of where we wanted to go with it. But we each brought something different to the project. And I can't say how much I admire the contributions that Stacy made along those lines. We knew that these ideas, as just a nonfiction presentation, didn't have any connecting. They weren't sticky. They could have been written up in a 3 or 4 page article and that would have been it. And it wouldn't have had the impact that we wanted to give to people through that. And so dramatizing it through this story and being able to live out our values through these characters and the way that they interacted with each other and the way that they dealt with challenges that they were facing was to us a critical part of the whole message. Because we don't do things in a vacuum. We do things in the real world that can be messy and things don't go the way we want them to. And we take 2 steps forward and 1 step backwards. So for me, I can't say enough what a wonderful collaboration this was because of what Stacy brought to the table and the way that she helped me to be the best version of myself.
Oh, thank you, Ron. It's very generous. Yeah, I think so. I think it's important to understand that Ron spent many, many, many years developing these concepts, teaching them, putting them into practice, coaching leaders to put them into practice. And so what made it lovely from a book standpoint is that the core of the book was solid. The concepts that are presented in the book were solid. And so it's a lot easier to build a story around something that is strong, right? And so we had this work that Ron had done for so long that he had tested and tweaked, and he had gotten input from people. And so coming together to craft the narrative, it was building the story around that strong foundation. So that was really enjoyable. We didn't have to work through, that piece of the content at the depth that normally you do in a book like this. I would say too, because number one, I mentioned this, I think already, but Ron, we had this whole book planned, right? And then Ron had this idea to do it in a fiction format. And I was like, okay, let's talk about this. So I wasn't completely sold right away. And Ron, he had this vision for doing this book differently. And, he came to our first meeting, which was supposed to be interviewing the outline that we had already finished. But instead it was, he had given me kind of a heads up that we'd be talking about this, but he really kind of laid out this new idea. And so I have to give him credit for that. And I think on both sides, a willingness to say, okay, yeah, let's look at this a new way. I think that we were very willing to do that throughout the whole process, especially in some of the the scenes that we both came with different life experiences or different perspectives. And there are a few scenes in the book that we had to spend a lot of time reworking. We had a lot of input. We were very thoughtful in who we asked as beta readers or early readers, but we had a lot of input that came in, and certain scenes we had very long conversations trying, specific dialogue or, specific way we dealt with something. And I think on both sides, a willingness to just listen and consider and work together to find the best way to tell this story is what at the end of the day made it the book that it is.
It's awesome. I don't remember when, earlier this year, Emily and I and our other team members, Jen and Kat, were in Austin, and we went to a songwriting event, a singer-songwriter event, like 17 singer-songwriters, and one of them, what's that?
Oh, I said nice. That sounds great.
It was blissful. It was at at Moody Theater in Austin, and anyway, that's its own podcast. But the idea that came, or that sparked as you were talking, is that one of the singer-songwriters gets up there, and all these singer-songwriters don't use electric tuners, where they can look down at the footboard and tune their guitars. They use their ear, because it's like it's almost like a sacred ritual to tune the guitar. And he kept plinking and plunking, and he went on tuning for maybe 5 minutes, it seemed like. And he looks up and says, "Don't worry, it'll be worth it." I love that, and I think that's what you were saying. That's what captured this spirit of excellence and art, that you honored the goddess of art through the entire process of the book, and that's obvious. I think that's why it's not Ron Price with Stacy Ennis, like a ghostwriter. It's Ron and Stacy, and you can really feel both of your energies and your ideas and your input in that, in it, because of that, and rather than the with.
Great. Thank you, Justin.
Thanks,
And
Justin.
that's, of all the books I've written, this is the one that when I finished reading it, I thought, wow, this is as close to perfect as anything that we've worked on together. And like Stacy, I can't, even though we've been through it numerous times, I can't go through it without really being moved at the end. And I don't want to give away all the plot, but for me, as a leader, when you can combine head and heart and give people practical things that create results, that's when I feel like I've been able to serve people in a meaningful way.
I think it's extremely rare. I don't know if I've ever read another business book that has a female protagonist. So I was pleased to see that. Was that already, I have a follow-up question to this, but was that clear in your mind, or was that a decision that was made sort of in the editorial process?
We had an early conversation about the genders, and actually I remember it being a relatively lengthy conversation. We kind of went through different scenarios of gender, age, where they worked, really getting a feel for who could carry forward these concepts the best. Who did we believe in, I guess, that could really represent what this book has to teach. And we talked about a lot of different scenarios, as I recall. Do you remember that, Ron?
Yes. And it's interesting because we had finished our early versions of the manuscript, and we were in the polishing stage when the Me Too movement broke on the scene. And we had a question about, were we too easy on the characters in this book? Should we make it more coarse? Should we make it?
Yeah, just to jump in and give you my opinion.
Yeah.
I think and this is part of my follow-up question, is I think what the main character confronts in her professional environment and her work is very realistic. I've confronted something very, very similar. Most people are good and they don't have conscious awareness of their biases. And that's the insidious part of any sort of discrimination. Is that you don't even know that you're competing against an embedded belief inside of the heart and mind of somebody else until there's a pattern that emerges, and then you begin to, and for me, I always feel terrible to go there and think that way. So I really appreciated how subtly real it was. It wasn't, this egregious act or anything of that nature. That lent a level of realness to it that I appreciated. And but I did want to ask, why was that important to include for you, especially in light of it was, prior to the Me Too and Time's Up movements, but why was that aspect important for both of you to spotlight?
For me, it was important because I felt that it was a real issue in our society where there's this unconscious bias. And I think you described it beautifully. And I wanted to be able to address it in a real set of circumstances, and yet in the midst of that show how somebody could develop personal power and how they could grow their influence and how they could maybe not cure all the ills of the world, but how they could make their impact by the way that they developed their own influence and the way that they understood these three different dimensions of leadership, and they're all a source of power. Sometimes we don't get as much power from positional leadership as we would like, but we can still tap into our character influence and our expert influence as a way of increasing the impact that we have in the world around us.
So true. And we tend to overlook our own influence. I think just, we become blind to the things that we're best at, and even to our own presence and the power of that and the energy around that. And one of the things I learned early in my career was that I had a lot more inherent power, than I was really using, that I was really tapping into, and not in a manipulative way, but in more of an assertive and self-directed sort of.
Sure. Yes. And Emily, it's only coincidental that our heroine in the story's name is Emily.
Yeah.
Well, I loved it right away. And I think her husband's name is Jason.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's my husband's name. So yeah.
Great. I love it.
Terrific.
Good model.
Steve, for you, any comments on the protagonist being a woman or that scenario? Was there a particular connection for you or meaning for you?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the work that I do professionally is in lifting up women leaders within their communities, within their companies. I have one of the companies that I run, I co-founded, is Next Level Women Leaders, and we specifically train on exactly what you're talking about, Emily. That this idea that we have all of the things that we need inside of us, but it's how we bring that forward and how we kind of show up internally and externally. And I think what's especially challenging for women, we have a lot of good things happening, right? I mean, we have a lot of changes that are occurring, but it's not enough. And we have to open up a positive dialogue that brings men into the conversation, that finds a space where we can say, okay, we acknowledge that a problem exists, but we're going to find a real way to deal with that. And as women, the first way that we can begin to grow within our positions, within our companies, starts inside. We can't control, what your boss is doing or what somebody says in the hallway. We have no control over that. So I think when we had this conversation about, is it a man? Is it a woman? How old is this person? We wanted the character to be old enough, far enough along in her career that she had some legs, young enough to still kind of be in that period of growth. And we wanted her to be a woman because we felt like as a woman in technology, she really represents all leaders, not just women. But we get to shine a light on a particular issue. And for me, that's very exciting to get to tell this story through Emily, through the challenges that she faces that are really universally applicable in different ways. So,
yeah, interesting. One of the things that you were able to do is take this. You walk this almost fine line, or you got just the right tuning on a couple of things in my view. And on this is one is you spoke authentically of the real issue of unconscious bias and discrimination without it becoming stridency, like righteous indignation. And I think the biggest thing that for me that made the story so like profound, where it transcended gender, is that the protagonist, Emily, did not see herself as a victim.
Right.
And the mentor in the story did not tell her she was a victim and here's what you need to do to get your revenge and a lot of that. And it's about real empowerment and real influence. It's not about revenge or using something that happened to you that's unfortunate or an injustice and letting that become the identity of the protagonist. And that's a fine balance. So
yeah, and I think, Justin, a lot of times people who are advocating for justice in some way, there's a tendency to either be outside in, saying that we need to force the system to change and we need to object and protest and demand change. Or you have another group of people that say, oh no, it's all inside out. You just have to change who you are. And in reality, I think it's a bit of both. I think to affect change long-term, you have to deal in both dimensions. And so one of the things that we wanted to capture in the book is the work that Emily did inside to build her own power, her own influence, but then to recognize that there is that ideal time and opportunity where you speak to power and you challenge the discrimination, or you challenge the bias that exists. And I think in society, if we're going to affect long-term change, we have to work at both levels. We can't just work one direction.
Yeah, that's so true. And when we are doing our root sessions, which is our immersive journey inward to your brand, one of the conversation starters we use around mission and beliefs is, what are you willing to commit civil disobedience over? Because that internal and external change that you spoke of, Ron, does not happen without some civil disobedience. And so it always sparks something in someone to realize that they have these things that they believe in, that they would be willing to do what Rosa Parks did, and or to say something like the Me Too movement did. They said something, or the people that are speaking out about the abuses in the Catholic Church, that type of stuff. It's given voice to it. So you both have used the word multiple times. I'm just looking at the count. I think you've each used the word impact at least 5 times. And so that's not an accident. That's a thing. And so my question is really a scenario. Is that, let's say 10,000 leaders at any scale read this book. What change do you think that the cumulative impact would be if 10,000 leaders read your book?
That's a good question. Ron, do you have an answer?
Yeah, I think
the top?
I do. I think, first of all, if 10,000 leaders read this book, they would first recognize that there are 3 distinct ways to lead. One of the things that comes out in the book is that we consider influence and leadership as synonymous. That to the extent that we influence somebody else and they either change the way they think or how they relate or how they behave, that we've demonstrated leadership. And in that context, I think sometimes my grandchildren are leading me because I watch the way they play with each other. I watch their creativity, or I watch the way they care for each other, and it inspires me to do more of that. So I think the first thing that those 10,000 leaders would recognize is that actually exercising positional leadership, or what we often refer to as pulling rank, is sometimes the least effective type of influence. Now, it is still influence, and you can use it for good or you can use it for bad. So I don't want to devalue it, but it's such a small part of what makes up a leader's ethos and their ability to influence the folks around them. Your expert leadership around what you know and what you can do, and your character leadership around who you are. And of course, we go into more depth of understanding those in the book. But that's the first thing that I would hope that these 10,000 leaders would change in the way they view themselves and in the way that they behave as a result. The second thing I think I would say, and then we'll see what Stacy wants to add to it, but one of the concepts that we bring out in the book, which I really love more and more all the time, is the idea of building virtuous conspiracies. Sometimes you don't have the official or the formal authority to change things, But if you have other people who have shared interests, there's a lot of influence you can have in an organization without ever having formal authority.
Yeah. Yeah. Rosa Parks did not go to protester school.
Yes.
Stood up.
That's right. Right. And she didn't have on her business card, Rosa Parks protester.
Exactly. Yes. How about you, Stacy? What about to that 10,000 leaders? What kind of impact do you think the cumulative effect would be?
One of the big areas of emphasis in the book is values, and really understanding your personal values and then living in alignment with those values. And I think that if 10,000 leaders read this book and really connected with this idea, I mean, we hear, values, it's kind of become a bit of a buzzword, but when you actually, get to the core of what it means to actually understand what you care the most deeply about, what is core to who you are, and then you make daily choices either in alignment or knowingly in misalignment with those values, I think that, to me, that could have the greatest impact, there's the word again, within their companies or communities or, the broader reach of their lives.
We agree with that. That's why in our work, that's what we start with. We call them beliefs, but that's where we begin. And we begin to tap into and articulate those things, which are often, while we have a set of values, they're very rarely really deeply looked at, tested, and then articulated and sort of solidified. And so I think the journey to do that is so revealing of yourself and certainly where you are in life and the context around you and how you're going to act in line with those behaviors. That's really where beliefs and behaviors sort of knit together. And it's an interesting space for leaders to raise their awareness of. And I think we have that in common, the four of us, that we're passionate about that space.
Justin, you talk about what would happen with 10,000 leaders. And first of all, I have to confess I'd be disappointed if it was only 10,000.
I like that. Yes.
I mean, this is a book that we hope 10 million leaders read and are impacted by. Of course, that's outside of our control. We'll do what part we can to communicate about it. But if there was one behavior that I would hope would change with everybody who leads it, keeping in mind that I think everybody's a leader in some way, it would be that people recognize the value and the importance of spending time working on yourself. It was 40 years ago that it was really the pivotal change in my life as a leader when I decided that I was going to spend 30 minutes a day working on becoming a better person, becoming a better leader. And although I don't always spend 30 minutes a day, sometimes it's 2 hours and other times it doesn't happen at all. But that theme of spending time every day working on becoming a better person and a more effective leader is the single most important behavioral change that has affected my life. And I hope that other leaders will make that similar commitment. In the book, we refer to it as discretionary time. And there are so few leaders that recognize the return on investment for doing that as a habit, that's the one behavior I would hope all those leaders develop.
It's very aligned with us, not surprisingly. Our mission at Root and River is to inspire leaders, and we also believe that everyone's a leader, to inspire leaders to go inward. And another way to look at that is we would say that there's nothing out there until you know what's in here. And I love that we're in this era of returning to ancient principles, know thyself. The oldest known recorded piece of advice, at least from like a mantra standpoint. And we're returning to that. And I think at a global level, it's the return to unity because we live in such polarized times. But the people that don't, those of us that are not on the edges of things, whether that be religious extremism or political extremism, which in the United States seems to be both things, is those of us in the middle of all that are trying to invest in ourselves and love our families and do great work, that return to ancient ideas, I think, is part of that healing process that's going to advance us to the next level from a consciousness standpoint.
Yeah. Beautifully put, Justin.
Thank you.
So we're running a little, not short on time, but we're kind of coming to the end of our time. And so we always close with a question that sort of asks you to share your truth. So the definition of synthesis that we love the best is contrasting our diverse concepts that come together to create a higher stage of truth. So for each of you, what's one truth that has guided you in your life or career and still guides you today?
Well, I don't know if this fits the exact definition of what you're asking, but my kind of driver in everything that I do is the idea of do the right thing even if it's the hard thing. So whether that means spending extra time on a project because I know that extra time will lead to excellence on the project, or having a challenging conversation with somebody because I care about them, or it's kind of any piece of my life or my work that I often check in if I have this thought of, oh, I don't need to do that, I can do this other thing. I check in with myself and I say, am I deciding not to do it because I don't want to do it? Or am I deciding this, or is actually doing this thing the right thing to do? And that is usually the impetus I need to do the hard thing, even, do the right thing, even when it's the hard thing.
That's great. Thank you.
For me, Emily, that core truth often is so deep that it takes a lot of vulnerability to share it. And part of the reason it takes vulnerability to share it is because it's not going to be what other people identify with necessarily. Mm-hmm. And so as my life has unfolded and I've developed a tremendous respect for people who maybe don't share that same truth, but they have their own core that I respect, against that backdrop of mutual respect, for me, the central divine truth is that I really believe in a divine presence. Mm-hmm. And I believe in my own experience that my relationship with God, and for me, it's not a belief, it's a relationship, mm-hmm. has become a partnership as a co-creator. It's almost arrogant to make that statement, and yet that's the way I've experienced it. That part of the joy of life is the ability to co-create with the ultimate creator. And that reflects or influences my relationship with everybody else, because I see my relationship with everybody else as an opportunity to reflect that same commitment to partnership, mm-hmm. and co-creation and doing something beautiful together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Whew. Those are good answers. Yeah, I got nothing more to say about that. That was profound, both of you, the way you said it. So we're going to go ahead and wrap our time. A couple of things for those of you watching or listening, that down below in the show notes, you'll get a link to buy the book.
Which I have right here if you would like to see. It's
we await pre-order, right? If people are listening, you can pre-order on Amazon.
Yeah. And that is wonderful because it helps us have a really strong launch week. So
yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So as a follow-up question to that, kind of related to, people reaching out to you, is what's your preferred medium for people to follow you and kind of experience your journey through the digital world? What do you prefer that people do?
Well, we have at the Price Associates website, it's price-associates.com/growing influence. We have additional resources there, videos, and we'll put a link to this podcast there. And we have templates that people can download that are do-it-yourself models that are found in the book, all of those kinds of things. Stacy and I are both on Facebook. Stacy's much more active than me on Instagram. And then we're both on LinkedIn as well. So those are all ways that people could connect with us. And we really do value the feedback, the ideas, the suggestions. We value the connection with people. It's part of what I love about social media is used appropriately. It helps us to build a better world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so all of that echo Ron, and the other place I publish my blog. So that's just at stacyennis.com/blog. And I publish relatively infrequently on purpose because I try to write pieces that I feel strongly about that I think may have an impact. Here you go, have an impact on people. So lately, a lot of them have been about Thailand, but I write about a lot of other things too.
That's great.
Everyone should check it out. Should follow and should take a look. Stacy, you're a beautiful writer, and Ron, I get inspiration from you regularly. So
thank you.
Thank you. That's very kind.
Mm-hmm.
The last thing is just for me is an acknowledgement of the impact that you both had on me personally. Ron, you in particular from a longer term standpoint and a shaping standpoint. And part of the reason it really moved me when you talked about co-creating with God and all that is, you planted those seeds in me 10 years ago or whatever it was. And it's just now bearing fruit that at least I can see. And Stacy, you and I have been dear friends for so long, and it's so awesome to see, like, I think when I first met you, you had just gotten married. So whenever that was, there were no kids. You were editing for some magazine in Idaho.
Mm-hmm.
And
I think that was right before I started working with Ron, actually, because
right.
we got married in 2011.
Yeah.
And Ron and I started working together around that same time. So
it just felt like it would have felt wrong not to acknowledge that impact. And I know Emily because of you, Ron. I mean, I think that divine intervention would have occurred either way, so that we can build this thing that we call Root and River. But you were the catalyst for that, so thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Well, this has been another episode of Synthesis. Stay tuned for future conversations that we have with nonconformists and people challenging the status quo, the sometimes quiet heretics that change societies and change systems. And so if you have a recommendation of a guest, you can please comment, or you can reach out to us at our website, rootandriver.com, and let us know. So we'll leave you to your evening in Thailand and your morning in Idaho, Ron, and thank you both very, very much.
Thanks.
thank you.